because when you pretend it doesn't happen, you pretend to say, okay, I'm going to decide that this doesn't bother me. I'm going to put this in a neat little box back in the corner and hope it doesn't explode at some point. That actually, from the physiological standpoint, does not allow you to get back to a regulated state. Your body's still releasing the cortisol. Your body's still releasing those stress hormones, even though you have decided I'm going to act like everything's fine.
Hi, and welcome back to Reflect Forward. I'm your host, Kerry Siggins, and I am so glad you are here. Today, my guest is Nataly Huff. She is an executive leadership coach, and her company is called Inspire Forward. Nataly transforms high-performing professionals into exceptional leaders. She has 15 years of corporate leadership experience, and now she coaches emerging executives who have the skills, but often struggle with the soft side of senior leadership. She is an expert in neuroscience-backed methods, and that is what we talk about today. And we go deep into how the brain works, what happens when we have our amygdalas hijacked, how to calm your nervous system, how to use compartmentalization as a tool, but then not just leave things in those little boxes. It's just a brilliant conversation. She is an amazing human being, and you're going to get so much from this episode. So hang tight, and I'll be right back with Nataly. Welcome back, everyone. I have Nataly Huff with me today. Nataly, thank you so much for joining me today on the show.
I'm so happy to be here, Kerry. I think this is a topic that is so important, so I cannot wait to get into it with you.
Absolutely. You've had such an interesting career and a story of how you got into coaching. And I would love to just hear a little bit about it. So can you just give me a couple-minute introduction of how you left the corporate world and got into your passion of helping other people?
Absolutely. I was lucky enough to be in a wide variety of leadership roles within my corporate life. And for over 15 years, I led small teams, I led large teams, I worked for small organizations and large organizations, long established and startups. And when time came to evaluate what is it actually that gets me out of bed in the morning, right? How do I decide that I am going to be excited about the day and do something great? This is when I recognize that growth is really the core foundation. My background is in marketing, and marketing is very much focused on growth. But the large element of it is the talent development, right? Marketing is a very large industry, a very large function that you really can't do all by yourself. So having different teams and working with different teams becomes very important. And that talent development and really recognizing what is it that is driving people to do what they do and be who they are and react the way that they do is all based on how our brains work. So when it was time for me to do my own thing, I wanted to focus on enabling growth. And in some cases, that means managing entire teams and supporting entire teams to grow and be better at what it is they're trying to accomplish. And oftentimes it's working with individuals and seeing how we can unlock their real potential and give them the resources to be as strong as possible.
And what made you want to dive into the neuroscience behind leadership? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
It actually, a lot of it came from my executive coach that I had when I was in the corporate world, who has a PhD in neuroscience, but is a brain-based coach. And her approach to me was so transformative that I couldn't stop keep going down that rabbit hole. And as a marketer, understanding what it is that is actually making us do things and how we can influence people's feelings and reactions without them even noticing it really was incredibly insightful. Adding that layer of science, and specifically science that affects us on such an intrinsic level, into how I support people felt very natural and ideal.
I think it's so important to understand how your brain works. As you know, I had substance abuse issues in my 20s. And once I really started to understand like the dopamine cycle and what was really happening and how my brain was being hijacked by the dopamine spike and then the drop, but the drop isn't as equal. And so it's the up and the down and the up and the down. It was so empowering to then really do something about it. And I actually learned more about that further past my substance abuse issues, but it was so clear to me, like, the brain is such a fascinating thing. And if we can understand how our brains work, we can overcome those moments of being hijacked, whether that's stress, whether that's substance abuse, whether it's an emotional reaction. I love that you've really taken onto this because it's such a near and dear passion to me and how empowered I felt by understanding my brain. How do you help leaders understand theirs? So let's go into some of the details around this.
In general, a lot of our behavior is driven by the reactions and the neurons that are firing in our brains. So you talk a lot about dopamine, and dopamine is such a huge driver, but dopamine is not the only happiness
No.
chemical that we have in our brain. We have oxytocin, we have serotonin, we have endorphins, and they all have different things that they have to bring to the equation for us to do well. And what's most interesting is that from the evolutionary standpoint, we have been designed to crave and want and maximize the presence of these chemicals in our brain. So it's not even a conscious thought that we want to do this because it will feel good. It is an immediate reaction that we don't even have a chance to process. One of the things that I work with is to understand what are the things that are actually bringing you those happy chemicals and recognizing what they are and knowing how to use them as tools in your tool set. How do you recognize that you're having maybe a little bit low dopamine, a little bit low endorphins? And what are the things that you can introduce into your day to maybe bring those levels back up and help balance yourself out? The other element that I talk about is the prefrontal cortex versus the amygdala, right? The things that happen when we react without thinking, and things that happen when we think. The interesting thing that most people don't realize is our brain uses 20% of our daily calories. It's a tiny little thing compared to the rest of our body, but it uses so much calories for all the processing that they're doing. And the prefrontal cortex, which is just maybe 5% of our total brain space, is using 20% of all of the calories that our brain is using. And that prefrontal cortex gets depleted. It's different for different people, but on average, most people can't focus and think for more than 90 minutes at a time, which means that if you're in back to back meetings, like most of my clients would be, you're done. You are reacting rather than thinking by the time that you're done with your 2-hour meetings. So, what do you do to replenish? And for some people, it's snacks, it's water, it's taking a walk, but anything that you can give yourself for a chance to not have to make decisions and give yourself a chance to replenish the energy that your prefrontal cortex needs to actually make those decisions. And the other element is teaching how do you know which part of your brain is currently active? When we're stressed, we have an immediate reaction because that's how we evolved to survive. But is that real or is that
Mhm.
pre programmed? Did you actually want to take action on that reaction or is that something that happened as a reflex? How do you recognize that? How do you slow that down? A lot of it is specific situational work and recognition of your own symptoms, but it makes a big difference in how we show up in our day and how we can influence our teams and our organizations.
Yeah, so I read somewhere that we process emotions in 90 seconds or something like that. And so if we give ourselves like just that space to just feel whatever we're feeling without making any decision, any reaction, saying anything, that we can move through at least that intense feeling that we get when we're like, "Ugh," or whatever the situation is. Is that true? And how can you give yourself that little bit of space so that you don't react, that you can respond appropriately?
Excellent question. It really depends on the person and the situation. And yes, 90 seconds is probably the average correct time, but stronger reactions might need more processing, and things that you have practiced more, you can probably process faster. Generally, what people do is they practice and build some resilience. When you have an emotional reaction or a reaction that to something that is stressful or threatening to you, there's a physiological response. And that physiological response is what sends you in that swirl. Part of that physiological response is actually to cut off access to your prefrontal cortex. A bear's chasing me. Now is not the time to analyze how much that bear weighs and how many ways it can actually kill me. Really not useful at that moment, right?
No.
Just run. But having a way to recognize the physiological symptoms and undo some of the physiological symptoms can help then tell your brain, oh, actually, no, we're not in a completely life and death situation. There is no bear. This is just an email. This is just a conversation. Okay. Recognizing your own physiological symptoms, because they're different for different people, generally in the same direction. But when you maybe start to have a shallow breath, when you notice that your mouth is getting to be a little dry, if you get goosebumps, all of those elements are things that are telling you that your amygdala has hijacked the situation. Take a sip of water and hold it in your mouth so that your brain can recognize that there's water in my mouth. If I was running from a bear, I wouldn't stop to take a sip of water. Okay, forcing yourself to have some of those deeper breaths all the way into the belly. Sometimes it's holding something that brings you to the current situation. Maybe it's ice water, or some people like to use pain stimming, just something that forces you to say, I'm here, I'm in my chair, I'm having a conversation, I'm not running from a bear. Bringing yourself to that situation can also help remove some of that hijack and then give you access to all of these tools that you've collected over the years that are in your prefrontal cortex. You just need to get access to them once you're calmer.
Yeah, I love that. I've been practicing one recently. She's a former addict, had this crazy life, and now she helps people regulate their nervous systems and understand how the brain works. One of the exercises that she gave on one of her videos was this idea of gulping in a big breath and then puffing out your cheeks. So I tried that. I was like, I'm going to see what that's like. And I will tell you, it has really helped, even more so than taking these deep breaths. It is a deep breath, right? You're just filling up with air and then holding it in your mouth and then puffing it out. And so I really appreciate all these little tools that you can find. You have to figure out what works best for you. My amygdala doesn't get hijacked too often because I think I've been practicing so much on how to regulate my nervous system. But really being able to do that deep breath and puff it out, puff up my cheeks and blow it out. It's one of those things that has worked really well for me. So I love the idea that you have to figure out what works for you. So try different things, because what works for somebody might not be as effective for you. But there's lots of different ways to be able to regulate your nervous system. And that, to me, is the ultimate goal. Nervous system regulation. When your nervous system is regulated, you just make much better decisions.
Absolutely. You get access to your entire brain actually sensing elements in your face.
Yeah.
And it feels weird. It feels uncomfortable. It breaks your attention from where you're going. So I love that one. But the other one I've heard is box breathing, where you inhale for 4, you hold for 4, you exhale for 4. That focus on holding in between the inhale and the exhale requires your brain to pay attention to it. So again, taking your attention away from the thing that's stressing you out and bringing you into the moment, because you're holding, breathing, holding, breathing. That's a really good one.
So this is something I talk a lot about at Stone Age, and that is the idea of the stories we tell ourselves. And I think when we get hijacked in those moments, it's super easy to tell ourselves a negative story, right? This is being done to me on purpose, or this is the reason why this person did it. And it's typically very negative instead of positive, and usually inaccurate. So how do you help leaders get out of that storytelling mode? Okay, they've told themselves a story either about themselves or about another person, and it's causing them great stress and anxiety. How do you help them get out of that storytelling mode?
In the short term, there's a think, feel, do framework, right? Generally, something happens. We have a thought that is usually in our kind of fast thinking brain that spits it out. We feel a certain way about that thought, and then we take action based on that feeling. And most of the time, that's fine. I'm hungry, I'm going to eat, right? That's not a problem. But if the thought is not necessarily accurate, it's part of the story that we tell ourselves, then our feeling is based on an accurate assessment of the situation, then our action is based on an accurate assessment of the situation. So, what I tell my clients to do is to slow it down, find the thought, and say it out loud to yourself. Somebody says something, your thought is, oh, they think I'm stupid, and that's why they're disagreeing with me. I'm feeling defensive. I need to stand strong and prove that I'm right. Okay, let's back it up. When you say it to yourself, they think I'm stupid, you start to recognize that that thought probably is flawed. They might disagree with this idea. Maybe they even think this idea is stupid, but most people don't go down that process, especially in a professional setting, that nope, it's not quite that drastic. But if you don't give yourself, and sometimes you need a second to hold that thought in front of you and really examine it, to recognize that, okay, maybe the thought is not correct. So I can take all of the subsequent steps down a couple of notches. That's the short term scenario. For the larger one, I'm a big fan of the work of Byron Katie. You familiar with that one?
I'm not. Mm-mm.
So, Byron Katie, a brilliant psychologist, and what she talks about is examining your limiting beliefs.
Mhm.
So, if you find yourself frequently saying that, oh, that person thinks I'm stupid, somewhere in there is a belief that other people think I'm stupid. So, when you take and examine that belief on its own, you ask yourself, is it really true? Honestly, is it really true? Can I know with 100% certainty that it is really true?
No.
Okay. How would I feel if I didn't believe that it was true? How would my life change? Right? And what evidence can I find for the opposite? What evidence in my life can I have that people don't think I'm stupid, that people actually think I'm really smart, and that this particular person thinks I'm really smart? So she has this framework called 4 questions and the turnaround. So I just talked you through those 4 questions, and the turnaround is really interesting. I would usually recommend doing that with a mental health professional, but the turnaround is changing the statement in a way that kind of gives it a 180 way. You can do it multiple ways. So if we have the limiting belief that everybody thinks I'm stupid, you can then turn it around and say, everybody thinks I'm smart. And you can find evidence for that. Or you can say, actually, I think I'm stupid. Whoa, that one feels okay. You can start understanding the evidence for that, right? Or maybe you start looking like everybody always thinks I'm stupid. You can say everybody never thinks that way, right? So you find ways to turn it around in multiple ways and find the one that hits you in your core. And that's the one that you need to start addressing. That's usually that turnaround that does the unlock of what is that programming in your amygdala that just jumps to that conclusion for you and then messes up your life.
This example really resonates with me. Like, my biggest trigger is when I feel like somebody is treating me like I'm stupid. And it totally comes from the way that my dad treated me when I was a kid. He left when I was young and he was in and out of my life. And when he would come back to my life, he was just always so hard. So any mistake I would make, it would be like, God, you're so stupid. That was dumb. He actually even told me he didn't think I was smart enough to graduate from engineering school when I told him I wanted to go to Colorado School of Mines. And this one just really hits home with me. I don't have the belief that people think I'm stupid. I know I'm smart. We graduated from Colorado School of Mines, but I get so triggered if someone speaks condescendingly to me or in any way makes me feel like they think I'm stupid. All of a sudden I go into protect and defend mode. It was shut down conversations because all of a sudden I'm like talking about something completely different than the person was. And they're like, what are you doing? Why are you getting defensive about this? And so I've really had to work on this a lot of owning my own trigger. But they are not responsible for that fact. They don't understand the way that my dad made me feel when I was a little girl and that I've built up this defense mechanism. So they're just having a conversation with me and maybe something isn't delivered eloquently, but that's not them. That's me. This is my trigger and I have to own it. When I do feel myself wanting to go into that protect and defend mode, pausing and saying, this is not about them. This is about me and my triggers. And I can't put the responsibility of them understanding my triggers onto them. I have to take responsibility for it. And it's been really helpful and allows me to get out of that prove and defend mode when it certainly isn't what people's intentions are, but it's definitely a trigger for me. It still triggers me to this day, and I'm almost 47 years old.
I love the comment that you made about their intention is not to trigger us. They might not just be considerate, or maybe they're not thought. Maybe they just don't know this particular part of my history.
Yeah.
So bringing that up would have an impact. It would never even cross their mind. Having the concept of holding the fact that somebody didn't mean to hurt me, but they still did, is a really interesting balance to have for yourself. Because I know a lot of people, especially type A types, that when they recognize that they were triggered by something, they go into the blame game
Mhm.
of blaming themselves for letting themselves be triggered when somebody clearly didn't know any better or had negative intentions. And that concept of it's okay to have an emotional reaction to something that's tied so deeply to your past, that is so intertwined with all of your internal programming, it's okay to have an emotional reaction.
Mhm.
It's what you do with that emotional reaction that's the difference. And recognizing, okay, I am triggered. What do I do now? Do I take a break? Do I take a breath? Do I go for a walk? Do I tell this person, because we have that kind of relationship, actually, when you do this, it makes me feel this way. Please don't do that and be more cognizant anymore. And if it's a stranger, then you might not have that kind of relationship to say it, right? But that concept of being able to say, yeah, that hurt, and not brush it away. You get to be hurt, even if somebody didn't mean to hurt you.
Yep.
We struggle with that as a species.
Yeah, I think that's really beautiful because I think oftentimes, especially me, I'm really good at making myself be okay with things, even when I'm not. I don't
Mhm.
like to feel bad. A lot of times I will decide, okay, I'm just going to let that go and not have really processed it and not let myself just feel what I need to feel to move on. There's benefits to doing that and there's downsides to doing it as well. And I realized that it's had become a coping mechanism. And what it did is it stopped me from having real honest conversations with people because it's like, you know what, like I can be okay with it and I don't need to have this conversation. And then you become this prisoner because you want to be okay and you want to make people feel comfortable and not feel bad, but you haven't actually like been honest and just addressed something, not from a place of blame, but just of, hey, I just need you to understand this about me. And I know you didn't mean it, but this is something that is really hurtful to me because of XYZ. I just wanted to share that with you. So that way, when we have this conversation next time, you understand where I'm coming from. And now I'm really leaning into that kind of more that radical honesty aspect of it for years and years. I was like, nope, I'm just going to be okay with it. I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to make anybody feel comfortable. I'm not going to make this into a bigger deal than it needs to be. That causes resentment and it causes you to bottle things up inside that would just be so much better if you just talked about it.
Absolutely. And sometimes you can't talk to the
Mhm.
person
Yeah,
that you want to talk to, but talking to somebody else, even if it's journaling or
yeah,
talking to a friend or your partner, that helps
yeah,
process it. Because when you pretend it doesn't happen, when you pretend to say, okay, I'm going to decide that this doesn't bother me, I'm going to put this in a neat little box back in the corner and hope it doesn't explode at some point, that actually, from the physiological standpoint, does not allow you to get back to a regulated
yeah,
state. Your body's still releasing the cortisol. Your body's still releasing those stress hormones, even though you have decided, I'm going to act like everything's fine. It takes a lot longer for you to then decouple it and work through it and actually get over it. So, yes, having some sort of a conversation, even if it's just speaking out loud while you're
yeah,
walking outside,
yeah.
makes a really, really big
I
difference.
love that.
But the other element is that people avoid those conversations because they're vulnerable.
Uh-huh.
Imagine coming to somebody and saying, I have a weak spot, and you found it. That's scary.
Yeah,
And you have to trust that this person is not going to use it against you.
yeah,
You have to trust that this person is going to respect it, because if you share it and then they violate that particular boundary or that particular trigger, your brain's going to go into a bigger spiral to try and figure out why that happened. So I understand why you'd want to avoid that conversation. I
yeah.
hear you completely.
Let's go back to a little bit about putting things in the box because I'm a master compartmentalizer as well. And that's partly how you make yourself okay with things is that you compartmentalize. Can you talk through the pros and the cons of compartmentalizing? Because sometimes you have to, right? And sometimes it can backfire on you. So maybe describe what compartmentalizing is and when it can be a benefit and when it can be a hindrance.
I think we all have to learn compartmentalization, but we have to learn the skill to live in our society, right? When we're growing up, we cry a lot because that's how we communicate our needs. And all of a sudden, we get to this point in time where crying is no longer acceptable. Like, you have to figure out how to get through your math test or through the day without crying. And that concept is hard for many kids as they're growing up, and they take it to a far too distant of a direction where they say no feelings are okay. Generally, the skill of saying, I'm not going to deal with this right now because I have to solve this problem, because I have to have this conversation, because I have to get this other thing done, is an amazing skill. You usually will see most executives incredibly good at that process, which is why a lot of executives have executive coaches and therapists to help deal with it.
Yeah.
But a lot of people go completely overboard and they never revisit what's in the boxes. And that's really the key. When you put something in a box and you say, I'm going to come back to you tonight, or I'm going to come back to you tomorrow, or I'm going to come back to you when I have my session with my coach or with my therapist, that particular element actually allows your brain to relax because there's not this fear that is being ignored. So it feels like it needs to yell louder for you to pay attention. It's a fear that feels acknowledged, if we're going to pretend that fear is a person, feels acknowledged and says, okay, I'll just wait my turn because it knows that you're going to listen to it at some point. So, yes, it is absolutely needed, it is absolutely required for our success in society, but giving it a time frame, I'm not going to pay attention to you right now because I have to get this thing done, is incredibly helpful. But you can't keep it in there forever. And you do need to review it. I'm an expert compartmentalizer. I'm just pro level, where I think it was probably in my 30s that I started realizing that, hey, I don't know how to feel things anymore.
Yeah.
I'm just really good at feeling this is dangerous. Let's just skate right past it. And going through therapy and going through a lot of spiritual practices, starting to actually feel comfortable having feelings and feeling safe having feelings, and then naming the feelings and then recognizing what they are, where they come from, was a much harder process than if I had allowed myself to say, hey, this makes me sad.
I'm glad you got to it in your 30s. I'm doing it in my 40s, and I have thousands of boxes sitting up there myself. And one by one, I am opening them up and going, okay, let's process this. And it has been incredibly uncomfortable and also incredibly empowering. Empowering myself, because I am really understanding like how I built up some of these walls around myself, and I want to take those walls down. I hated feeling bad and I hated getting hurt. So I did everything I could to avoid getting hurt, which means that I never let myself fall in love. I never let myself really be loved. And I hid from feedback and all of these things that might make me feel bad. So now it's like, nope, we're not going to do that. I want to feel life to the fullest. There's nothing wrong with getting hurt. That means you're having a human experience. And I don't want to have those boxes anymore. But I had a lot of them back from the time I was a little girl. It's such a coping mechanism, and it can be such an effective one. But it is, in the long run, it diminishes the quality of your overall experience of your life because you're not feeling things. And literally, that is what we are here to do, is to experience all the feels.
One of the things that you learn with age, right? We start to build those coping mechanisms. We start to build those boxes when we're little. And because when we're little, we don't necessarily have the experience of knowing that we will survive. The bad feeling feels really, really bad and terrifying. And your first heartbreak, your first disappointment, all of those things, we look back at, okay, well, it wasn't that bad. It felt really bad, but you know you'll get to the other side. And having that knowledge and having that confidence makes it actually easier for you to start opening up those boxes and saying, okay, this is going to suck. I'm not going to like it, but I know I can get to the other side. And that other side's going to be so much more beautiful.
Yeah.
So that's one element of experience and resilience that is important for us to build up. The other element, I actually don't remember who said it, but I absolutely love it, that talks about how you have to honor it before you can release it. Actually thanking it for what it's given you. A lot of the things that I have to untwine and heal within myself are also the things that allowed me to be incredibly successful in my career, to learn all the things that I've learned, and to do the things I'm doing now. So there is that duality that you, again, have to hold of, oof, yeah, this came with a price, but it also got me something amazing, and both can exist at the same time.
Yeah. So zooming out, what I love this is that the message is the goal isn't to be perfect. The goal isn't to not feel like that is not what leadership is about. That's not what living life is. It's about experiences and embracing yourself fully and understanding yourself deeply. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, the goal is never perfection. One, because perfection doesn't exist. And two, because perfection has so much tied to external validation or external criteria of what perfection actually looks like. The goal is experience. The goal is learning. The goal is moving forward and doing better tomorrow than you did today. When you do have your amygdala hijack and you can't process anything in a given point in time and you react, and then the next day you recognize that you probably could have handled that better, you make amends and you learn and you remember. And the next time this happens, you have one more tool in your toolbox to access when it's time to address it. The goal is to grow, the goal is to move forward. And perfection is such an end state that is also completely unsustainable. That maybe when we all elevate ourselves to the point of not being burdened by all of our mortal limitations, maybe that's perfection. I don't know. But it is an end state that is not a possible state within our current experience.
No, it's always a journey. There's just always more ways to level up, and there's always more layers to peel back as we go through this experience. And I think that's what makes it so interesting and exciting and sometimes painful.
Yes, absolutely.
I can just see why your clients love to work with you. You're so knowledgeable and you just have such a great way of explaining things, just so easy for people to understand. So I can imagine that you really can help people really truly see themselves more clearly as you work with them.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that.
All right. So as we wrap things up, I have my signature question. The name of this podcast is Reflect Forward. What does Reflect Forward mean to you?
Actually, it's a lot of the things that we talked about here. But if I were to synthesize it into something really small, self discovery and self awareness, like reflection, is a fundamental requirement for progression. You can't move forward unless you know where you are. And that reflection is sometimes painful, sometimes requires at least naming your boxes, maybe not opening all of them up. That reflection is completely necessary to owning your part, owning what's happening in your body and in your brain, and making a decision on how you move forward from knowing where you are.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Thank you. How can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn, but you can also see all of the offerings that I have on my website, inspire-forward.com. My goal is to help people where they are. My coaching is not exclusively executive coaching, really. It's whoever is in a state that wants to move to their next state, hence the Inspire Forward, and figuring out how do we get them there. So if you think this might be something you want to talk about, there's a free exploratory call on my website, and I'm happy to speak with anybody that's looking to take themselves to the next level.
I love it. Nataly, you were brilliant. This has been such a fun conversation. I could talk to you all day. And I really appreciate you imparting your wisdom in such a clear, actionable way. I'm sure that my listeners are going to really get a lot out of this episode.
Thank you so much, Kerry. I'm happy to do this again. You're absolutely right. We can have conversations for hours. So anytime you want to do this again, just let me know.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, everyone, hang tight. I'll be right back. All right, everyone. I hope you appreciated that conversation. I could have literally talked to her for hours. I am so into this. This is like exactly what I'm working on in my life right now. So I really appreciated Nataly's insight, and I hope that you got something from it too. So with that, I will leave you for your day, and I look forward to seeing you on next week's episode of Reflect Forward. If you think someone could use this podcast who needs a little bit of help with not letting their brain get hijacked, please share it with them. And overall, if you like this podcast, send it to a friend, write a review, Subscribe to it on your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube. It always helps with the algorithms and gets these amazing stories out to the world. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next week.